Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the third season of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and my guest today is Shaitan, who is the most spontaneous guest I have ever had. I just wrote a message on Twitter in which I announced that I'm looking for guests, and he just sent me a short introduction of himself, and I said, sure, when are you available? I told him that I can do it right now, and about 15 minutes later, here we are talking. Hello, Shaitan.
Hello. Nice to meet you, Vlad.
So, how did you get into Bitcoin? For how long have you been around? And you told me you have been since the beginning. And what is it about it that you like so much?
I adore its trust. Really, it's in a world that you don't see trust very much at all. Like everything is really untrustworthy nowadays, and it has the ability to be very, very disruptive in a monetary sense, and that attracted me to it as well. But I didn't really, with Bitcoin, people don't really grasp like Bitcoin. It takes a while. It really does take a while to grasp all the aspects and to sink in just how disruptive it truly can be. I was really, but really, I keep thinking back to like when the Pirate Bay was on, and this was I think 2007, 2008 or so, and the I forgot his name, but he wrote reply letters to the corporations like Disney and Warner Brothers that were sending him letters to tell him to stop and stop your website. And these letters that he wrote were just, they were hilarious. Number one, and they were like, yeah, I'm not American, loser, go home. They were very insulting to these big corporations. Now I thought that was inspirational to the nth degree. Like I was just blown away by what they were doing, and that they had the balls and the veracity to actually send those letters and really take on these people. And I really think that was a big moment in like culture, quite honestly. And that was, BitTorrent, they were using that technology. And then, fast forward a couple of years, and I'm playing Magic the Gathering, and I'm supposed to be playing with some pals at a comic store one night. This is probably late 2009. And I walk in, and nobody's sitting there where they normally sit. They're all sitting around a computer. And I walk up, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? They're like, well, we're trying to set up this wallet and try to get something called Bitcoin in here and try to figure this all out. I'm like, well, what is it? What are you talking about? Bitcoin. And they're like, it's an online currency. It's like a money. I was like, okay, well, how much is it worth? And they're like, nothing really. It's a cent or whatever. And I was like, well, what are you guys doing? Well, what are you guys even messing around with it for then? But I ended up leaving because there were so many people there, and I just didn't really understand it. And then I went home and researched a little bit more, and then WikiLeaks got involved. But I've always followed it, pretty much since that point in time in 2009. And you can't really put the hopes that people want to put on Bitcoin until it can prove itself for a while. So I didn't want to jump on and promote it extensively if it had only been around for a year or two, because I know like computer technology, and you just have to mine the blocks for a few years and make sure that the protocol is robust and secure as it is. And once that came, and that conclusion came, and I've just been all about Bitcoin as far as disrupting the monetary system and political nature of the world. The centralized fiat printing is it's not necessarily a bad thing, quite honestly, Vlad. I think that it wouldn't be so bad if they would just stick to a certain number. So you say we're going to print 20 trillion and that's it. Then I think everybody would be fine with it. Even if it was just simply fiat. I think it's just the point that they keep printing for bombs and warfare and just not for the people. It's just so insane to me. Like it's simply debt that comes out of, it's debt. And so I mean, it's very, 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 very important. I think it's like super, super duper important for the human experience that they really understand, monetary policy and things such as those natures. Like they use it every day. I mean, they work their whole lives for something that constantly goes down in value, and they don't even realize it. It's just like, wow. So that's my angle, pretty much.
Well, you covered a lot in there, and I'm thinking what I should ask you about more specifically. Mm-hmm. How come you didn't get involved into mining? As most of the people I talked to who got in early were actually curious on how they can actually mine Bitcoin. Or they had a friend who was mining it and was so happy to send this worthless digital currency to everybody. And some of them happened to hold about 10 Bitcoins until 2017 and then realized, hey, look, I can actually buy a car or something with this money.
I have, I mined it, probably about 4 years ago for a period of time. I was in a happy marriage with children, and money wasn't really a concern for me. I did research the mining aspect of it when I was researching, and I thought it was very interesting. But the mining aspect is, I'm just really not a computer technical fellow. I really am more of a philosophical observer, and those kind of technical computer programming language type things are just something that I need to work on. It's something that, but back then I was just furthest from that. The politics and the philosophy and that kind of thing was much more interesting to me.
So what kind of political dimension did you find in Bitcoin back in 2009?
That was, generally there were nerds, like myself, but generally it was nerds. It was a nerd culture, that kind of really computer savvy person, hacker type, cyberpunk, really, cyberpunk, a hacker, that kind of person. And it was a movement, more so than any kind of monetary thing. It wasn't, back then it had really nothing to do with, the people that I were around. It really didn't the money thing was just like this weird, strange thing that it was going up in value so much, quite honestly. But that also added to its power, as a disruptor. So, people got on board with it. It's okay. So now it's, worth more and more. This is good for us too. So it's kind of like this symbiotic thing with the political nature and then the monetary value of Bitcoin.
Okay. It's interesting that a lot of people got in because of the price, and they saw some kind of news article about the price increase and they got curious. They fell down the rabbit hole. And at first it was just greed and the idea that they can maximize their investment in US dollars. And then they understood that there is something bigger going on, and that at some point they might even become some kind of financial elites of the world if we happen to switch to this decentralized currency. But the idea that the people who got in first were actually interested in the underlying technology and wanted to experiment with it and didn't care much about the money is actually what tells Bitcoin apart from all the other altcoins. As every fork of Bitcoin is basically an attempt to capitalize on something, and it's not as immaculate in terms of conception.
Right.
You can say that they're trying to experiment with some kind of new privacy technology, like it happens in the case of Grin, but they still have some money which funded the project, and they have some kind of expectations in regards to profitability, which was not present in Bitcoin. Nobody expected it to blow up. Maybe a few people knew about it and had this type of expectation.
Totally decentralized right from the beginning, pretty much.
I also like to think that the nerds who got in early on and the computer scientists who believed in it when it was basically worth nothing will be around even when maybe it fails as a project, if that ever happens.
Right. Yeah. I have a dirty little secret that I have to regarding the monetary aspect of Bitcoin is, the thing that really shocked me about Bitcoin on the monetary side was that it blew by gold like gold was lead. That shocked me. That really did. I thought, Bitcoin eventually when it hit the price of gold, it's going to really hit a wall. Like people are going to say, okay, well that's gold, and it would at least take some time to pass gold. I thought, this is in my mind, so I thought I had time. But the fact that Bitcoin just ripped past gold like it was nothing, like it was just like, see you later, gold. I was shocked. I truly was shocked at that point in time. I was like, wow, that is really, 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 really powerful what I just witnessed. Like it just made gold look like it was just nothing. There was no hesitation, no stopping at the price, nothing. It was just whoosh, buy. And that was pretty shocking to me, quite honestly.
Well, you're making the comparison with the gram of gold, I guess, or the ounce of gold. But a gold bar or the market cap of gold are still bigger, and those are still milestones that we want to accomplish.
Right. No, I agree, but it was just a shock to me. I just thought it really, was a great thing. I was like, man, this is fantastic, quite honestly. But it was just, as somebody that is monetarily conservative and socially liberal, it was just, shocking to me, quite honestly.
So you mentioned that you're into philosophy.
Yeah.
You like to look into the more philosophical side of affairs. So how do you see a society in which we have attained that point of hyper-Bitcoinization that people talk about? And we basically use Bitcoin as a currency on a daily basis, maybe on the second layer through Lightning.
It's really tough. It's really tough. I would like to say that, our monetary policy, hyper Bitcoin, like a Bitcoin standard, where all money is, value, and there's no fiat printing in it or anything like that. But you must give fiat some credit in the fact that it has that's really solely the reason of all this advancement in the human condition right now, and all this technology, because governments can print fiat and invest and do all these things is the reason we have, this new modern future, quite honestly. I mean, if you don't, so it's a tightrope. So I don't necessarily think a straight up gold standard is great. But then obviously printing money fiat into oblivion is not great either. So I think there is a happy medium to where you can have growth. But then, because something like a Bitcoin standard, I really worry about people, quite honestly. It's tough.
Sometimes I think about it in terms of whales, and I know that there are people who own hundreds of thousands of BTC, and they're not going to sell it anytime soon. And sometimes if the price doesn't go below a certain threshold, it's because these people are not selling.
Right.
And there's a Romanian guy who owns about 600,000 or something. And he got in very early. He's some sort of computer programmer. He was famous a few years ago because of his blog and because he was very vocal in some respect. And I think of these people and I realize, okay, so we reach this point where Bitcoin is the dominant currency of the world. Are they going to give anything to charity, or how do you make them move the money that they own in such large amounts? It's so obscene. It's much more than they will need in a few generations.
Right. I mean, Oxfam, if you read their latest reports, that 28 people have half of everything on Earth. Like, wow. I mean, that's so repugnant and disgusting. I don't understand why people don't quit all their jobs and stand up and say, what is happening? How can 28 people have half of everything right now? And, that's obviously one of the problems with fiat is when you overprint it, you have concentration of wealth and et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's just a human nature thing. So if you have, people with, 600,000 Bitcoin, they're not really going to share it either.
Yeah, but I'm still stuck in this utopian mindset, and we're having a philosophical discussion. And I'm thinking right now that maybe that Bitcoiners will be much more generous and willing to donate and help bring people out of poverty. And we saw many initiatives with Venezuela, and we saw the legal fund of Hodlonaut, which went to $100,000 in about a week. And these kind of initiatives give me hope that
Right.
we might
agree that those are excellent examples, and that the charity in the culture is fantastic. But there are other examples too, like even Andreas Antonopoulos, who said that he didn't have any Bitcoin, then all of a sudden he had a lot of Bitcoin after he said that. So I do agree with you, and I agree that I think cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, offers people the chance to really feel confident in their charity, right? So where it's going. Even if it was, say United Way, say, we're not going to use fiat now, we're going to use Bitcoin. I think everybody would be happy because, they would send them a lot more because they can track it. You could see where they're sending the money and how it's being used and whatnot. And that's much better than how it works right now, as far as charities are concerned.
Oh, yeah. And as a guy who donates to UNICEF, because I like to think that animals and children are the only beings in this world who cannot really empower themselves. They don't possess the means for it. And I donate money to them. And sometimes I think that the money that I donate every month goes to some kind of meetings that they have in 5-star hotels. So they can brag about their achievements, which may or may not exist. And I have also seen how the United Nations likes to pump their statistics to look like they have achieved a lot of development by replacing numbers with percentages so that it looks more impressive.
Right. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of issues, and Bitcoin can help a lot of that. I wish charities would. I wish governments would say, charities must use that. That would be nice. But then governments obviously probably get a cut too of fiat somehow, some way. So, it's always, people really need to participate in the communities that they're a part of. I'm considering moving to Uruguay because, they are socially liberal or open, but yet 90, I think the latest election had 96% participation rate in their elections. That is astounding.
I don't think that's a healthy metric. And I don't think Uruguay is an established democracy.
They're actually a constitutional republic.
Well, even the authoritarian regimes are constitutional.
No, they're definitely a democracy, yeah. Like it's constitutional. It's basically like America nowadays, and down in Uruguay. And the latest election, they had a 95 to 96% participation rate in that election. And here in America, it was like 50% or less. And people really need to participate. That's really, they have to understand their monetary policy and participate. And it's like Andrew Jackson, like he should be a Bitcoin god because, he ran on a ticket that said the banks are me, and he won. And he led us into a period of prosperity for this country. And I think when he left, he said something like, okay, I'm leaving you this country here with no banks and prosperity, and it's up for you to keep it. And unless you're really vigilant and active on that, you're going to find that a bank will crop up on every corner in every city and really take your wealth from you. And that's what I see today. I see a bank on every corner, and it's just so important that people really participate in the community, quite honestly. And I was being kind of hypocritical on that myself, and my daughter has really forced me to get out and interact and with the community. And today is an example of that, because I am an only child, and I was a golfer for state champion golfer, and was by myself for a lot. So I'm more of an observer that just kind of observes, and now I'm trying to. My daughter's forcing me to start to interact more. She thinks I have some things to offer, so she's humbled me in that aspect and said, "Dad, you need to get out there." And so here I am.
Oh yeah, and I guess part of the Bitcoin philosophy is that we should bring back communities and care much more about what's going on in our area. And by the way, you live in Arizona, right?
Yeah.
What is it like to be a Bitcoiner in there? Can you actually survive if you have one BTC and you want to eat or sleep somewhere?
Yeah, it's getting worse in Phoenix right now because everybody from California is coming here. California is totally and completely out of control, and their tax situation, the homeless situation. I mean, it's just it's kind of degrading California at a quick and heightened pace. And so we're getting a lot of people moving in from California, which is raising our property values, raising rents. So you could survive for probably a year on one Bitcoin right now. If you were really...
I mean, if I can make payments with Bitcoin, if I can find ATMs and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could do that. As a matter of fact, Arizona was one of the first states, if not the first state in the United States, where you could pay your state tax with Bitcoin.
That's impressive.
So there's that too. So yeah, you could survive. Absolutely.
Usually when I ask this question to people, they tell me, oh, not really. It's very niche and most people haven't even heard about it and you're going to have a hard time.
No. I mean, you could, there's many angles. I mean, you could use, you can obviously use a payment network to transfer your Bitcoin instantly as you make the payments, but you can also, I also use it as an opportunity to really talk to people and see if they'd like to barter. Say, hey, listen, you got this product and I've got Bitcoin. If you know what it is, then we can talk. If you don't know what it is, you should know what it is. It's at the very least, it's a brand new asset class that, I mean, think about that. Like I try to tell people, it's a brand new asset class. Wake up. Like that doesn't happen every day. Oh, a new asset class just came around. It's a very big deal. So, I mean, I use it also as an opportunity to talk to people. But yeah, you wouldn't have really any issue if you wanted to do that, quite honestly.
Okay. I ask this question usually because there was an article in Bitcoin Magazine and the reporter tried to live on Bitcoin for a week in Silicon Valley and he was unable to. And the conclusion was that the payments adoption has lowered since 2013 when they first conducted this experiment. And Silicon Valley is this experimental place where they like to use all these new technologies in finance and everything else. And it was also mostly due to the ICO bubble and how every store is trying to use their own token issued on the Ethereum blockchain and maybe give you discounts if you use their own token and wacky stuff like that.
Right. No, I mean, it definitely, I think less actual retailers are accepting Bitcoin directly. So that could actually maybe be the case that they're correct in that. But you have the ability nowadays to convert your Bitcoin into a payment network fairly easily. I mean, unfortunately, you might have to give up custody to do that of your Bitcoin. I think I only know of one project that you can keep custody. It's a non-custodial payment platform on the Visa network. And so the option is out there for you to retain custody and use the Visa network. So there's that as well. But you're right, as far as direct Bitcoin payments, there might be a little bit less. I see that changing though in the future with the expansion of and the knowledge growth of Lightning Network. And once it becomes a little bit more user friendly and it becomes bigger and it just gets worked out more. And that's what I see. So I think more direct payments will start coming online with the Lightning network rather than just the traditional Bitcoin.
Speaking of Lightning, what was your experience with it?
It was just one time and it was fine. I mean, I guess I haven't really used Lightning very much at all. Like I said, I use the non-custodial payment platform. So I basically make my payments on the Visa network rather than direct payments. But it could, I guess it was confusing to people because you have to send a request, I guess, how that works.
Yeah, you have to send invoices with the amount.
So it just takes time for, those things to be understood and kind of integrated and worked on. But so far, so good as far as Lightning Network. The network seems to be expanding. I'm not too sure if really recently it contracted a little bit, but that's also a natural part of things. It'll expand and contract and expand again. So it's just exciting, quite honestly. It's really exciting, because I do see Lightning Network probably being able to, be integrated into like big time companies. Like they'll be able to like integrate a Lightning node for their payments and accept payments directly with Bitcoin instead of third parties. So I think it's just going to be a matter of time, quite honestly. Just here within a year or two, you'll see a lot more, retailers and a lot more people accepting Bitcoin via the Lightning Network.
Oh yeah, I can see that happening. I've tried some solutions and they were worthy of the name Lightning.
Right. I know Jameson Lopp is doing great work over at Casa, and he's coming out with new products virtually like weekly. And that's great too, because you want people to be running their own node. And then Stop and Decrypt just released her hashnet release paper that, regarding hashing protocols and Bitcoin pools and stuff like that. So if we can get that seems very good as well.
Is it really her in the case of Stop and Decrypt?
What was that?
Is it a her in the case of Stop and Decrypt?
It looks like her. But,
the old avatar used to be that of a stormtrooper.
I know, yeah. No, I saw our old avatar on the Medium post, but I'm the same way. I'm a them kind of a fellow or lady as well. So
even Giacomo Zucco identifies as a 7-foot-tall woman.
Right. It doesn't, I'm not offended by anything like that. If somebody wants to call me a woman, I respect women. I like women. It doesn't bother me. I don't know. Like the whole masculine thing is kind of strange to me. I mean, it's masculinity and being a man has nothing really to do with how much hair you have or the muscles on your body. It's really willpower and the drive to do, to provide and be a man, quite honestly.
Oh, you should tell that to Ragnar.
Right.
That guy loves his guns, loves his muscles, loves to eat steak.
Right. It's willpower. I think that's really the thing. Like having a really strong inner core. Um, but yeah, Ragnar seems like a great guy too. You know. Yeah. He loves his guns and his Bitcoin. That's fine. It's fine. You know, I just love genuine people. You know, I just absolutely love it. Like, as long because you know where they're coming from, Vlad. Like, you don't know where people are coming from anymore. Like, even if you tell me, like, if some guy walks up and says, you know, I'm a full blown commie red and I love Stalin, and I'd be like, man, that's great. I know where you're coming from. Let's talk. Like, how did you come to those viewpoints? You know, let's have a beer. You know, rather than, oh, you're an idiot. No, I know where you're coming from now. So this is great. I could find out why you come from that point and how you came to that conclusion. Maybe I can affect your future thoughts on the matter. But it's just being honest and knowing where people are coming from. I don't see a lot of that anymore. It's like, I don't know where people are. You know, they say one thing and do another, and it's just like, wow, this is crazy. Like Craig Stephen Wright.
Yeah, well, let's not get sued today.
Right, yeah.
He's still in the middle of a lawsuit as we speak.
Right, yeah. Yeah, no.
And I really don't want to get involved with it. I'm no Peter McCormack to actually challenge him and say, come on, I'm going to call you a fraud, sue me. I think that's childish. You can hold your opinion without challenging somebody to sue you and then trying to pose as, first of all, he tried to look strong, then he kind of turned himself into a victim. And then when the situation turned out to be in his favor, and Craig Wright seems to have some issues in court, he started being braggacious once again. Braggacious. How do you pronounce that well?
Braggadocious.
Braggadocious. I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, I think, you know, you're right a little bit. You know, I can't disagree with anything you said right there. And you know, I probably would have come out with some different type of wording if I really needed to put it out there. But you know, I don't. You know, I did it on Twitter. Actually, I posted Craig Wright's a fraud on Twitter, just because, quite honestly, he is, and people need to know that, and they really, you know, they really need to know that you know that's not really who they want to really be following. And the Bitcoin SV thing is just. I mean, we're talking about people's hard-earned money. You know what I mean? Like people, you know, slave and work, and not saying slave, but toil. Toil is a better word. It's people toil and work, and for their money, and you know, I really feel bad for them if they, you know, put it in something that is not Bitcoin, shall we say that? And so that's why I think people really should know. But you're right. I think, yeah. Maybe if you're on a public platform like that, if I was running a show, I wouldn't say it. Like, so if I had a following or influence of that nature, I wouldn't come right out and say it like Peter did. Just because, you know, you're inviting a lawsuit and he got sued. Right? It's pretty simple. And it's unnecessary because most people know that already, quite honestly. It's not like that's any kind of big news headline that Peter broadcasted. You know what I mean? It's not like he's letting us know any new news.
I think the whole situation has to do with the fact that he is also British, and they had a better understanding of what the laws are in Great Britain and how you don't have to prove that you're something in order to make people. I don't know how I should phrase it, but the libel laws in Great Britain are kind of messed up. And if you accuse somebody of offending you and being detrimental to your public image, you don't have to prove that you are the opposite of what they are saying. You don't have to prove anything. And that's why it's flawed.
Peter would definitely know that, being from London. And I think, obviously, Craig is living there now. He would know that. So I don't know if it was a ploy to try to get more listeners on his show, because he knew he would probably get sued if he said it. And that brings attention, obviously. But, I'm not going to say that that was the case. I don't like to be pessimistic in that sense. But you're right, it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. But who's to say that it wasn't, though? His listenership is up, I'm sure. And he obviously got the funds to fight it. So I just think it just was unnecessary. Right? It just brings this whole unnecessary thing into the community that really doesn't need to be there, and it really isn't serving any purpose other than like ego.
Sometimes I think from this perspective as if, what if people who have never heard of Bitcoin and have no idea what's going on suddenly stumble upon one of these threads where people like Craig Wright and his following argue with Bitcoiners? And what kind of impression are they going to have of what we do and what we are?
Right. You're right. I mean, it's pretty crazy.
It looks like a cult from the outside.
I wouldn't go that far. It may look amusing or maybe, adolescent sometimes, but I wouldn't say cultish. I don't know, maybe a little bit though. It'd be interesting. I think, I don't really think it's a cult because, Bitcoin isn't really, it takes other people for Bitcoin. Like there is no Bitcoin. Like Bitcoin can't propagate it, like talk about itself. Bitcoin can't promote itself really. So that's really how cults are formed, is like, Coca-Cola is a cult because they marketed themselves that way. And Monster's a cult because, like that's the new marketing thing, is make your product a cult. But Bitcoin doesn't have any marketing really. It's not, doesn't have essentially a marketing brain. So it's everybody else that would be turning it into a cult and not Bitcoin, strangely. But I don't think that really is the case. I think, I think there are some people in the Bitcoin culture that are, obviously super duper die hard Bitcoin only maximalists. And quite honestly, that's fine. I don't have any problem with them. I do think that there will be other protocols that do make it, and it won't just be Bitcoin, right? Because the Bitcoin for me obviously was, like I said from the beginning, something that is disruptive, that will bring down, the money printing and how detrimental that is to the human existence, of everyone on the planet. So that's but the maximalists, I don't have any problem with them because that they're saving people that might get into something that's not Bitcoin, that might that might be BitConnect, shall we say, or something of that nature. So the other protocols are something that are fun, that but need to be borne out, just like Bitcoin has been borne out, and we'll see what happens.
Okay, so my next question for you has to do with your belief in BTC as opposed to all the other tickers which emerged in 2017, as you have been around since 2009, maybe not in terms of financial involvement, but at least in terms of following Bitcoin. And then you saw this scaling debate and this phenomenon where everybody was trying to promote their own vision, and companies that were operating with Bitcoin and miners were trying to increase the block size, knowing that this also centralizes the protocol and brings them more control over it.
Yeah. 2017 was absolutely insane. I mean, every single day was insane. Whether it be some new coin or some new ICO or some new story or some new, some new exchange, disappearing. 2017 was just mind blowing. It really was. It was just fascinating. And then that's all I'm remembering is 2017. How every single day I would wake up and it was just something new, something crazy. It was just so exciting. Like it was just so fun. But to go back to what was the original point, Vlad?
How come you did not get lured by the narrative of big blockers?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, the big block debate. Because I was in the same boat essentially as Trace Mayer. So I think basically just like he did on the topic. He's like, listen, the professionals are over here and these are not the professionals. Like, these are the big brain boys that you need to put your trust and your money in, and these are not them. And it's really that simple. Like, there's a core of people that have been working on Bitcoin for a long time, and they're very smart, intellectual people. And you know, they're the ones that I would put my trust and money in, just like Trace said. You know, I'm not, you know, I mean, it's a really serious thing when you know, it was weird in 17 because you could buy, you know, Trump coin and you'd make a lot of money. I mean, that was very strange. It really was. Or Putin coin or whatever it was. I mean, you could make a lot of money on any shit coin there was. So it was kind of a weird situation. But the people that were in Bitcoin the longest knew that it was just simply a heightened situation of what has happened before, because these cycles have happened previously. And so you were trying to tell people, you know, like, just stick with Bitcoin. Like, just stick with Bitcoin. But then the big block and the small block debate happened in 2017. That really wasn't good, because egos got into it, right? We go back to the ego thing, right? And you know, people thinking that they know better than other people, and their answer is the right one, and, you know, not viewing, you know, what has happened to get us to this point. You know, here we are 7-8 years into a protocol, and it's still here, still existing, even though a lot of people don't want it to be here. A lot of powerful institutions probably don't want it to be here, but it's still here. And so we need to really think carefully about the future, and really think, you know, be very, very, very conservative with the protocol, extremely conservative with the protocol, you know, because that's where the value is, right? And that's where the most disruption can be done. So, you know, so that is really the key. I was with Trace, like, listen, these are the professionals, these are, you know, what they're saying, and I'm going to go with them. You know, I'm not a technical, you know, developer, so, you know, I'm not going to be out there going, you know, Bcash is the one. Like, why would I? I mean, it's just people that don't have any development knowledge, just to be jumping on the, you know, the Bcash or BSV train is just strange to me. Like, you don't have any clue on the technology, and you're philosophically jumping on something that you don't even have a base understanding of in a technical sense. You know, I mean, Bcash, I mean, it was just reorged, like 51% reorged like a month ago. I mean, that's insane to me. I mean, for it to have $350 in value right now after a reorg, it's just like, it's mind blowing to me why it's not $4. Why is it not $3.50? Because it should be. It quite honestly should be. I don't care if it's, you know, the payment, cash, whatever their gig is. For them to reorg and have mutability now, and it not be $3, it's just, it shows us that we really need to educate more, quite honestly. You know, is that
I
to take
guess
the...
it also shows that there is a greater centralization of ownership. And at the moment when the fork happened, I guess people who owned a lot of Bitcoin claimed their fork coins and then went on to dump them on exchanges. And then people like Roger Ver and Jihan Wu, or whoever got involved into BCH, they bought them and they're holding them to retain as much value on the market as they can for the longest time.
They're going to get burned. They're going to get burned. That would be my guess. But that's a great point, right? So that's why the price hasn't come down as much as I think, because of the centralization. And again, if somebody decides to not be central in that role, then, I mean, I don't want to be holding any of those coins if that's the case. Like, so yeah, I mean, it's things like that, you know, it's too bad that it happened too, because Roger was so good for so many years, Vlad. He really was. He was so good for Bitcoin. Roger was like hardcore, nice guy, send you Bitcoin. Roger was great. Roger even donated like $1 million to a charity. I mean, who does that? I mean, really, $1 million to a charity. You know, so I mean, I feel for Roger. I really do. I really feel for Roger, you know. But Roger is not bigger than Bitcoin. And he really didn't understand that. He really did not understand that. You know, I think that he thought that he might have been the father of Bitcoin because of all the work that he did. And, you know, he'd think that these developers were not listening to him and whatnot. And, you know, I get a little bit, but still, I mean, you really have to check your ego. Like, listen, this is a really big deal. And you're not bigger than Bitcoin. And the fact that he's around right now saying that Bitcoin Cash is Bitcoin is just even more atrocious. It's like, oh my God, Roger, what do you know? Oh my God, like, I mean, at least be honest. There's that like honest thing again. Like, at least be honest. Bitcoin Cash, call it B Cash or whatever, or excuse me, whatever he wants it to be called. But at least be honest and play fair. You know, if you think that your gig is a little bit better, call it Bitcoin Cash. Say it's Bitcoin Cash, and try to get the share. You know, try to propagate your coin over there. Okay, and it's just so sad to see it go down like that. Really, it's just. Quite honestly, I'm just so saddened by it.
Well, I'm going to be here and like...
Sorry.
That was actually louder than you speaking. I guess you just speak softly, or she screamed so loud.
She's... Hey! Sorry.
That's fine. I'm not sure if I can take that out with some kind of noise gate in the editing, but never mind. I guess that adds up to the dynamics of this interview.
Right. I'm also a full-time parent and have full custody, and their mother's apparently just rolled up for her day. I love you guys.
Okay, so you're speaking of Roger Ver, and to some extent I agree with you, as that libertarian side of him is so great. I listened to a recent interview with him, and he recommended some readings, and he said, you should go on and read The Law by Bastia. And I went on and read it. It's not very long. It took me about 30 minutes to read. And it was actually interesting. It was great. And it made me think, okay, so this guy is well-read. He's well-spoken. He's clearly more educated than the average person in Bitcoin. But at the same time, he took his ego so far that he feels like there's no turning back.
Right.
Because I don't believe that he thinks he will win this fight. He has lost it. And maybe that in December 2017, when BCH became the second biggest coin in terms of market capital after it got added to Coinbase, there was some kind of hope for the big blockers. It was like a small flicker of hope that maybe the miners should favor them, that maybe there would be something going on through which the market decides that they are the worthy Bitcoiners or something. But that hasn't happened.
Do you think it's a possibility that Jihan Wu just bought him off and paid him to do that so that he could sell more miners for 2 protocols? You think that would be the case?
I don't think so. I mean, Roger is kind of a control freak. I've heard that from people who worked for him. I have a friend who has a friend who used to work at Bitcoin.com, and he told me that there were these moments when he would get so mad that he would fire everybody.
Interesting. So that sounds rather petulant. So that's also a sign of a huge ego. We've definitely seen signs of that.
He tries to look humble in interviews and try to belittle himself in arguments as if he's trying to empathize with you. But at the same time, he thinks very highly of himself. And ultimately, that's what brought him down. Personally, I wouldn't mind if he just gave up on BCH and continued to promote Bitcoin, the real Bitcoin, to the world. But he would have to lower his ego too much.
I mean, he would have to, be humble. He would have to, and I don't see that I don't see that anytime soon. But honestly, with what I've seen, since the fork, humility is definitely a virtue, and he doesn't really have too much of that. But you're right. I would like to see Roger say, you know what, I was wrong. And I made a mistake. And Bitcoin.com is now going to promote Bitcoin, BTC, and I'm back on board, and I apologize about this. And I'm gonna take this Bitcoin Cash project, and I'm gonna let other people take care of it, but it won't be promoted as Bitcoin any longer. That would be just like incredible, right? I think everybody would be like, "Yay, Roger's back! We love him again, even though he's got a huge ego."
Right. But I think there is a wave right now of reformed big blockers, people who supported maybe the New York Agreement or Bitcoin Cash, and they're trying to get back to the real Bitcoin. And the one of whom I am thinking right now is Erik Voorhees. He went to the Bitcoin 2019 conference by Bitcoin Magazine in San Francisco last month. Or was it this month? Time passes so fast. Anyway, he basically tried to somewhat apologize for his involvement in the New York Agreement and his idea of SegWit2x, which wasn't his, but he supported it.
Right, yeah.
But I realized that he didn't really apologize. He just tried to explain his motivations and said, I own a business which would benefit from lower fees. And at the time, it was what I thought was right, but he never really tried to seem like he was wrong. He didn't go to that length.
Right. I mean, if you're going to go to that length, you might as well just come out and say it. But he might not really feel that. Who knows? He is right in the aspect that he is running a business, and it probably would have been less, expensive for him. But then he's contradicting himself if that's the case, because he has always been a part of the libertarian part of Bitcoin. Like, he considers it disruptive, and he was a Ron Paul advocate. So he politically likes Bitcoin. So for him to say that on one aspect that he believes in Bitcoin's disruptive nature, but yet he wanted cheaper fees is kind of at odds, I would say. So, but I like Erik. I like, I know where Erik's coming from, and he's proactive and builds stuff and gets stuff done, and I think it's a benefit to the community.
I think I used to like his blog.
I never read it.
I don't remember what it was called. It was Bitcoin and Money or something. Wait. Blog. I'm looking it up right now. Money and State.
Gotcha.
And sometimes he was being very philosophical and presented arguments from economists, classical liberal ones, and sometimes Austrian ones. It was interesting to read, but when he got into that whole New York agreement and signed it, and he pretty much seemed disingenuous.
Right.
It wasn't him anymore. He was saying, okay, it's a free market and we get to fork Bitcoin as many times as we want. That's not an issue. Just let the market decide, because we can split it and make our own versions of it. And for a while, he was regarded as a BCH advocate. Man,
I hope.
I think BCH was very close ideologically to the SegWit2x fork.
Right.
A lot of the proponents just made the switch and they said, okay, there is already this version of Bitcoin which is close to what we wanted to do, so why don't we just embrace this?
get that. There's a whole bunch of different, teams out there that have their own apparently vision. But again, it just goes back to, who has been working on Bitcoin for the longest? Why is it around and why is it still around? It's very important. Like the security of Bitcoin is like paramount importance. Like if you're going to have monetary markets run on Bitcoin and you're going to have, billions, maybe even $1 trillion running on a Bitcoin network, then it's going to have to be damn secure, right? It's going to have to be like vetted. And I don't think people really get that. Like, it's got to be super secure. It really does. And there has to be no question about that at all. Like the algorithm, you must be able to trust. And for people to just say, yeah, we can have this many forks of this, that, and we can do this and that. And it's like, man, you're not really getting this whole thing, are you? Like, or you're getting it in a greed sense, and we don't, I don't know, most Bitcoiners that have been for a long time aren't really, don't really identify with that. It was more like occupy, take down the system. And it's a racist monetary system. And that's why a lot of people were in Bitcoin at the beginning. And I think Erik was too at the beginning. I don't know where he kind of shifted gears there. But I think he's back. He'll be all right.
I like him as a person, but I don't agree with his ideas sometimes. And it feels sometimes like he has an agenda, which is strange. Even at the end of the conference, the conclusion that he had was that they should be, and by they, I mean that the other person involved in the debate was Eric Lombroso, or how do you pronounce it?
Yeah, Erik. Yeah, he seems like a really, really nice guy.
He's very nice, but Erik told him that, Erik Voorhees, ERIK, told him that it's better to hold the conversations in person as opposed to writing tweets. And I disagree with that. I think that when bigger decisions are to be made, it shouldn't be just a few people discussing in person and trying to settle their differences. The fact that we as a community see what's going on and it's all transparent and we can intervene, we can present our own points of view and take sides, that's a feature of Bitcoin, not a bug.
I agree. I totally agree that it should be open and transparent and ideas should be expressed freely within the community.
I agree that there are trolls involved. I know that there are a lot of disingenuous accounts which get bought, and I'm looking at UBSV right now. A lot of people have been bought to shill that shitcoin.
Right. Yeah, that's another thing. Like I just found out, like one of the old BTC guys, like he's back with his account. I think was his tweet. Like this is my account again. Like really? Like what happened? You sold it? Like you sold your identity Twitter account, and then now you have it back. Like wow. Right, and now you're telling us about it. Like wow, and like it's okay. You think it's okay? Like that kind of stuff is fine. It just seems so strange to me. I don't know. But yeah, no, you're right. But Erik Voorhees, I think he's been good, and I don't. He'll never do something of that nature. Like I don't see Erik ever doing something of like that. But he I think he just he was trying to get shapeshift and I guess make some money. He got a little greedy and now what did he tell Lombroso at the end there?
I'm paraphrasing, so I don't have any direct quotations, but it was something along the lines that they should be speaking more in person as opposed to tweeting at each other.
No, so I totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ragnar had a big problem with that too. Like, who gets invited to the round table, Satoshi's round table meeting, and certain things like that are I think it's just kind of human nature, though. People want to feel, important, and that's just kind of like how things happen. But I agree with you 100% that, it should be transparent, and more people should be invited, and the more open, the better, And regarding 2017 and the big block debate, that was a really strange thing too, because this is kind of like all new, and people don't really realize the gravity of like power plays and politics and game theory, and like that was all coming, to head, like for, and we're talking big money, and some of these players, and the reasons for their views. So I mean, it was a pretty big deal too, and so. For the core group of guys to stand firm and go through it and get through it, I think Bitcoin right now is better than it's ever been.
Oh, I agree with that. And if you look at the hash rate, I think it reached an all-time high about last week.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So the hash rate has bounced back nicely too. Yeah, all-time highs. And
people trust in it to a greater extent than they used to, and they don't see the speculative dimension as much. They can see that this will be around for a few more years at least. The cryptography is solid. It has proven to work for such a long time. There are institutions that are interested in issuing assets. I'm not sure if they want to do tokens yet. I spoke to Giacomo Zucco, and his firm is involved in facilitating that to a third layer. But they offer, what do you call them?
Color coins?
That will be workable sometime in the future on a second layer or third layer. But they're offering features and trading desks. That's what I was looking for.
Okay, yeah.
They're offering trading desks so that you can go to your bank and say, I want to invest in Bitcoin. They're going to let you file a piece of paper, fill that in, and get some Bitcoin, but it kind of defeats the purpose.
Well, I think the integration with the current system is just fine. The really thing that really people don't realize is that the banks right now are a real problem, because they're in everywhere. Like Glass-Steagall, we had something in America which affects the Federal Reserve. There was an act that was enabled called the Glass-Steagall Act that separated banking houses. So you couldn't have one bank doing another banking, like retail stuff, and one bank was an investment bank, and that's all they could do. So they couldn't really consolidate banking. And when Clinton removed that, it was just it's been downhill ever since, right? And that's what allowed the consolidation of all sectors, not just banking, but media and business, and because that's what these banks do, right? And it's just so important, Vlad, right? That people understand that, and they understand that Bitcoin, that is really an algorithm that you can trust, that isn't going to make decisions like you are making decisions. Like that's why it's so powerful, is it leaves you in control. And that's what I've been working my time on, is just educating that on a basic sense. Like, listen, you're in control, and Bitcoin is your value control, and you're saving it, and you have the ability to send it to anybody that you want and receive it from anybody that you want. Yeah, it's just so powerful. I always go down those philosophical roads, like feel the power of that. Like nobody can tell you no. Like, isn't that great? I think that's wonderful.
I think that's what makes it so special, as opposed to having low fees, as some people try to promote in their agenda. Right. You can have low fees with PayPal. Well, they're not so low. I think last week I transferred some money, and the conversion rate to my local currency is terrible, and I felt ripped off. But anyway, I think if Bitcoin gets adopted to a greater extent, we're going to have very expensive on-chain fees, and we're going to be pushed to move to the second layer. And that's fine.
If mining gets even more decentralized, you could see the fees stay at least modest, which wouldn't be too bad. But I don't view Bitcoin as like the cash system. Like, Roger keeps pushing that. Like, it's so important that you have value and you can store that value without a third party. I mean, that is just so freaking important, like the security aspect and being able to store that value. Ask Venezuela, like, they're storing their gold in the Bank of England, and they wish they didn't. So it has nothing to do with buying a Coke or buying a coffee or whatever. That seems silly to me. Like, I can't believe people are making such a big deal out of that. Like, listen, I mean, we're building a network where there's no third party. So obviously transactions are going to cost more because you have to incentivize. It's very simple. Like, I mean, we get how people can get this, like, but then they'll try to say, well, what about, the poor? You said Bitcoin was supposed to help the poor. Well, then, just be patient. We'll probably have Lightning, mobile apps that will be able to do that, and, if not, if there needs to be another protocol that is used for, coffee or whatever, that's fine as well, because they're eventually going to turn it into Bitcoin anyway, and if it facilitates that easier, then more power to it, I guess. But, the store of value really is like paramount, because, we're going against fiat, right? Bitcoin is like, that's the enemy, right? And it's not about coffee or Coke or whatever. It's that store, secure, non-third party, and confiscatable value. So important.
And I feel like in this regard, I should tell the story of my grandparents and then my parents. And that's part of the reason why I'm into Bitcoin. As my grandparents had their wealth confiscated, they basically had everything taken away from them when the communist government came, and they were trying to build this utopian egalitarian society, which actually ended up having all sorts of elites and people who were privileged and living in lavish wealth while the others were starving.
Right.
Very animal farmish. You had the
Right.
pigs who became the elite class, and maybe that they took away the farmers and they turned them into the enemy.
They just literally did not let them farm and die off is essentially what happened, right? As a matter of fact, the communists came in and took all the grain seeds. I mean, they were hardcore. They went into every farm and took out everything. And it was very shocking. Like, when you go research like all that, it's like, wow. It's very scary, right? It's very scary. And so your grandparents had that happen to them in Romania?
Yeah.
Wow.
We were not part of the USSR formally, but we were under the influence of the USSR. It was all drawn in Yalta when they had that meeting at the end of World War II.
Right, yeah.
And you had Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill.
Right.
Basically drawing lines on the world map and saying, this country is going to be with you and you're going to take this one. And we ended up on the side of the Iron Curtain, which was not really pleasant because my country, for the first time ever, was stepping outside of the agrarian era and was having its sort of industrialization and its first forms of capitalism. And that only took about, let me think, maybe 50 years. And then the communists came and they centralized everything. They took the wealth. And to their credit, they did build stuff. They built roads, they built homes for the workers, have these huge gray blocks of apartments
You got to be
in
aware
every
of those
city.
people, Vlad, though. You got to be aware of those builders. They're always builders. Those damn dictators. You know? Like if you get somebody that's coming up in the political ranks and he says he wants to build, a lot, then I would not vote for that person. I mean, it sounds all nice and dandy. That's probably why these people get elected. But generally, like the terrible leaders of the world, like, are fierce builders. Herod, in his temple, like he built his temple, and like they just generally are builders. As far as I'm concerned, Hitler was a big builder. He built out, obviously, the Autobahn and all kinds of different things. Big builders. Lots of building going on in those kind of things. And so communism was no different. Like, that's what they did, is they built a lot, strangely.
But it's interesting that my parents were in their 20s when they got married. And a year after they got married, they saw the end of communism and how it all fell. But then you had this wave of speculators getting into the market, and basically it was all centralized and nothing really had a real valuation. So people who knew what to do got extremely rich overnight just by claiming some assets. At the time, if you wanted to get a piece of land, you only needed 2 witnesses who were living in the same city. Wow. Or an apartment or something, and you'd go to a notary. Is that what you call it in United States? You go to a notary and you tell that person, okay, write down that this is my piece of land. I'm claiming it. It's going to be my private property. And these people are going to sign and agree that they are witnesses of this.
Wow.
And some people got very rich and are basically millionaires by today's standards in terms of real estate.
Right.
But my parents had their wedding and they received some money at the wedding, and the plan for them was to buy a car. And with the money that they were supposed to buy a car, because they saved for about a year, they ended up buying a couch because the inflation came and they were not aware that this would happen. There was no way to get informed at the time. You had to rely on the state-owned media, which was telling them that it's all fine. And they didn't know to exchange their money into dollars, because that's what the people who were smart were doing at the time.
Right.
The dollar was a lot more stable. And the people who did exchange their money into dollars ended up being the current financial elite. So just think about it, going from a car to a couch.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't. I mean, I did a monetary study from 1972 to, I think it was 2008, where $176,000 would basically, you would need $686,000 40 years later. So basically it was like, gigantic drop in value. And that's a 40-year lifespan as a person's working history. So you're working toiling for 40 years, and at the very end, when you want to retire and spend all the money that you've saved, it's now worth basically 25% of what it was. I mean, I mean, that's just so evil. I can't even begin to describe how evil that is. After 40 years of working and saving, and now it'll buy 1/4 of what you thought it would. And now it'll buy a couch or whatever. It's just so evil, and people just have no idea. They're just completely ignorant to it, and that's what it is ignorance, because people are smart enough to figure it out if they really wanted to.
Yeah, but it's so easy to just ignore whatever's going on and just go on with your life.
Well, now I'm worried about it might turn into a situation where your parents were in, where all we have is state-owned media, and they're really not going to be able to figure that out. Like freedom of the press and all that. I mean, solid information is getting shut down these days. And, we might get to a point where it's just back to where that was. Like you just, you're told, and most people won't really know or understand or have a hard time figuring that out.
I actually had a scholarship in Sweden back in 2013, and they were bragging so much about their government financing media. They were saying, we're not allowing our press to be subjected to the perverse interests of advertisers, and we allow all publications, regardless of their political affiliation, to exist by giving them money from the state. But then when they were having situations which were against the government agenda and they did not want to report, they would be ignored and nobody would cover them. And then you would have local communities being upset at the government.
Right. You just can't have it both ways. You know that you never can have it both ways. And just governments like that both ways. They think they have enough power to have it both ways. And this hypothetical myth that is government. People get into government and they believe the myth. Like all of a sudden they're a part of something that's bigger than them again. Now here we go, ego again. And they don't realize that government really means mind control. That's essentially what it means. And it's just so strange to me. Like after history, if you view history, you're like, the bigger government gets, it's not going to get good for us. And I don't understand how it's not very clear to people, like very, very simple and like not understood. I mean, that's really the strange thing to me. It's like how people just they're not engaged in important things. They're not engaged in their monetary policy. They're not engaged in their kids' schooling. They're engaged in their kids' sports activities. We get fights at Little League games all the time now. Like, they're not. I mean, it's just very, very strange. And hopefully, Bitcoin can actually refocus people. It's got that much disruptive power to slap people across the face in a philosophical sense. It'd be like, wake up. That's another reason I like it. Like, hello, like, Bitcoin's still here. It didn't go anywhere. You thought it was going to die, but it's not. It's still here. Now it's worth a lot more than you ever thought it was going to be. You might want to clue into why that is.
Sometimes I think about this, but then realize that we might be in the middle of an echo chamber, and it's just the same people who are more likely to support the 99% movement, or those who are enraged about the status quo and have a certain mindset about individual liberty and financial sovereignty. We are the ones who get into Bitcoin and try to understand it to a greater extent. You're going to have the masses who either get in for speculation because they want to live a better life, which I guess is okay. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have more resources for yourself. And then you have those who will never trust anything that is not guaranteed by their government. When I speak to my father, even when he's an economist and he has lived through that huge inflation of the 90s, but when I tell him about Bitcoin, he tells me, no, the Chinese or the Americans or the Russians are going to take it down. He's telling me that I'm foolish and I should just support something that is issued by the government.
Right. And that's, to me, that is such a foolish view. Like, can't you, I mean, look at reality right now. I mean, again, point to Oxfam, like 28 people having half the things on earth. It's just like that's not going to work, tell them. It's not going to work because government are made of people, right? And you can't trust people for the most part. I'd like to say that you could, but you can't. And you can trust Bitcoin. That's why it's so powerful. And government is run by people. It's very, very rare that to put it differently, people think that power corrupts no matter what. I don't agree with that. I don't think that infinite power corrupts infinitely. I believe that power attracts be absolutely corruptible. That's what it is. It's not that power corrupts, it's that power attracts the people that are corruptible. And so that's why it's always going to be like that. That's why it was so important at the birth of our country that the power be separated. That you not have enough power in any one position, because that's what attracts the corruption, is the power. It's not the power itself. There have been leaders that have power that have done good things. Maybe the Sun King was an example. There have been others. But it's not the power. It's that it attracts the corruptible. And it's just so important that you have something that's not human that you can trust, or that, governments, eventually there's going to be people in there that you're not going to be able to trust, even if there is right now. Even if the government's great, they're going to rotate out, and eventually that's why you cannot put too much power or trust in government, I believe. And that's why Bitcoin is so powerful, is that issue of power and corruption in human nature.
Exactly. But at the same time, you can find corruption amongst these who hold power in Bitcoin right now. And sometimes I actually think to myself about all the power that the developers have. And they are definitely aware of it. And they seem to be humble about it up to this point. But they have to maintain a clean slate and make sure that they don't do anything which gets them into trouble with governments, as their identities are in most cases clear and they can be found, and they can be tortured, they can be subjected to blackmail.
Right.
And they are influential. Even if they cannot single-handedly change the code, they can shift opinions of others. They can say, we need to do this. And when Gavin Andresen wanted to increase the block size and implement what he called BIP 101, and
Right.
he had this idea that Bitcoin should scale according to Moore's law and stuff like that. I think that was the result of him having too much power and becoming kind of corrupt. And people still suspect him of being a CIA agent of some sort.
Right. I mean, well, I don't know why he made it public that he talked to the CIA. I mean, we'll start there, but you're absolutely right. It's that, but that's a great thing that I really like about Bitcoin, is there are really a lot of developers, some have been in for so long, like, Matt, Greg, so that they get a lot of the press, but there are a lot of developers doing a lot of different things. But again, that goes back to human nature, though, because I think it's just a human thing so people will create a myth out of Greg Maxwell, right? So they mythologize him and create him into something that he may not want to be, or is bigger than he seems. Even though he's a fantastic developer and has been great for Bitcoin, and he's never really done anything negative to Bitcoin. But that's the great thing about Bitcoin is if somebody really wanted to harm it, it would be very hard to do so, even if he was like the A number one developer. Even Greg, if Greg Maxwell came and said, I've got this BIP that activates SegWit 2x and does all this other crazy stuff, people would tell him, hey, you're crazy. Even though you're Greg Maxwell, you're not going to get that done. I mean, that's the wonderful thing about Bitcoin, is like even one of the number one guys, the best, would get shut down if basically his idea was unsound. And that's wonderful. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, you don't have to worry about the CEO coming home on a bender and destroying your company, or you know what I mean? Like, it's just so fascinating. It really is. And it's also new too. Like, people don't understand, like, this is all like pretty new in political terms and structure and governance and everything. So it also is pretty shaky. but it's held up thus far, and that is another thing that's great about Bitcoin is that, like I said, even if you're the number one guy, if the bit that you submit is crazy, it won't get adopted.
I agree. But at the same time, the fact that when you first get in, you're so fascinated with this myth of the developer and the creator, and you look up and try to find out who's Satoshi Nakamoto. And that's a recurring obsession. I guess it's part of our human nature to look for the father of something, for that person who created, and to think in terms of people as opposed to faceless identities.
Well, yeah, they want to mythologize, they want to create the myth. I mean, that's just a natural thing that happens, and it's not necessarily, it can be dangerous. I mean, that's what even Dune was about. Is Muad'Dib is a myth, and he might not have been good for everybody, but the myth was created, and it was followed blindingly, and that's never really a good thing. And so, I mean, that's a great thing about Bitcoin is that didn't happen, and the myth really ended up being Bitcoin itself, which is pretty fascinating, and not a person. But I think that's just a natural occurrence of human nature, that people just want to mythologize things and create those kind of mythologies, really.
Sure, but in every other project that we can think of right now, we can associate it with a creator.
Right.
And a lot of people, when they get involved into this space, they most likely buy some kind of shitcoin, whether it's XRP and they're going to worship Brad Garlinghouse and what's the other guy's name? Schwartz or something.
I don't even know anything about XRP. I just know that was it McCaleb that started that?
Yeah, and he went on to create Stellar.
Right. And I don't see any point in that, quite honestly. I don't understand how people see value in something that's mutable, and you don't really have a clue on inflation or anything. I mean, it's just so strange. It really is. Like, I don't know. But
yeah,
I don't really.
They see the numbers go up. It's all green. It looks good. Went up 200% in a few months.
Right. Well, Ripple's been around for quite a long time too. I mean, it was around very early, so it does have a mythology behind it. So there is a myth that kind of follows XRP or Ripple. That I don't know if they try to break that with the XRP thing, which is kind of strange. You think that they would want to kind of ride that myth, but I guess legally they couldn't, and they needed to do what they needed to do legally regarding the protocol. But that should give everybody another heads up that that's just another red herring. All right, they had to do that because of legal ramifications. And why were they doing it? Because it's centralized. And now they're trying to say that XRP isn't Ripple and Ripple isn't XRP and has nothing to do with each other. It's like totally ridiculous. It's almost like a comedy.
It's funny that Zcash is doing the exact same. Is using the same tactic.
Right. I think you're right. Yeah.
They used to have the Zcash Foundation, and now it's called the Electric Coin Foundation. They're trying to not associate the foundation with the coin.
Right. This is after they took all the mining rewards, right? This is after
it's insane, but the point that I was trying to make is that you can associate an altcoin creator with the project, but in the case of Bitcoin, it's so mystical. You don't know who Satoshi is. A lot of people use the image of Dorian Nakamoto.
Right. It's much safer that way. It really is, because those myths are meant to be eventually knocked down, and we don't want that. So it's actually, in the long run, it's intriguing, but it's much safer for Bitcoin that it was like that, which is fantastic. You know, it's interesting that that new information has come out about that other chap that might be Satoshi in Europe.
Who?
God, I forgot his name. Oh my God, I wasn't expecting to be interviewed today, but yeah, there was a developer that it was some pretty significant evidence that he could be Satoshi.
The one who got involved with the drug cartel?
I think that is it.
Like LaRue?
Yeah, yeah.
X?
Yeah, was that the guy I'm thinking of? It was like just came out, what, about a few weeks ago?
The one who supposedly was presented by Craig Wright during the lawsuit documentation?
No, I don't think that was the guy I'm talking about. I'll have to do. I'll send you I'll do some research and send you a message later.
It would make some sense for Satoshi to be European, but my Satoshi is Nick Szabo, no matter what. I don't care if he is not, but he is smart enough to be.
You know, I don't think that, because he blocked me on Twitter for never ever responding to him for some reason.
Really?
I've never ever tweeted to Nick Szabo. I've never responded to anything Nick Szabo ever said, and I'm blocked by Nick Szabo. So I don't understand that, quite honestly.
He's following me, apparently.
Oh yeah, nice. Well, that's definitely better than I've been having. Better luck than I've been having with Nick Szabo.
He never interacted with anything that I posted. He sometimes retweets when you mention him, and it's something favorable that he can use, like to build up a portfolio or something.
Right.
I guess he likes getting praise for the work that he has done.
Right. You know, I think there was some writing correlations to some Satoshi's writings that use the same kind of verbiage that Nick uses.
It makes sense if you look at the story and figure out the background and the timing, and also how he went rogue for about 2 years or something. And around that time, Satoshi was active. And when Satoshi disappeared, he came back as Nick Szabo and started going to conferences and stuff. And he never explained why and what went on. But it's not this reason of perfect timing that I believe that he is Satoshi. It's just that he's so knowledgeable about so many topics. And he is very curious in nature and likes to cover all sorts of topics on his blog. And even though you're blocked on Twitter, you can check out his blog. And he even wrote about topics such as NASA. I'm sorry. I'm so tired. I cannot pronounce abbreviations properly. But he's just mind-blowing. It's hard to comprehend all the information that he presents within one article.
I tend to think, quite honestly, that it was like a criminal type. I don't know. That's just me. I think that it was a criminal type that was inspired by BitTorrent and the actions of like Pirate Bay, and I think it was just simply something that shallow. It wasn't like any of the hardcore devs that worked on that kind of cryptography early. I think it was just some cryptographer, obviously, that was very knowledgeable, but one that had criminal intentions, strangely, that pulled it off, that knew that what he did would be effective at what he wanted it to do.
The fact that Satoshi was active on Bitcoin Talk and answered to all the questions of newbies and was so nice and humble and helpful just makes me think that there is no way this guy could have been malevolent.
That's true too. I mean, you're all right there. He was on Bitcoin Talk, and he did retort and interact, which would definitely lead to one to think that would probably be more Nick Szabo type.
Could have been Hal Finney. He's a worthy candidate.
I don't know why he would be so afraid of the CIA, though. You know, like, so when Andreessen told him, hey, I got a meeting with the CIA next week, and then all of a sudden he disappeared, would Nick Szabo have that reaction?
He's a private person. He doesn't like... I saw that he went to conferences, and I heard that he didn't speak to anyone outside of his stage presence.
Right.
He doesn't like to answer questions about himself. You can ask him about his work, but not about him as a person.
See, that's a bit, I don't know. To me, that's strange. Yeah. But some people are like that, I guess. They're just very private people, and they need to be. That's how they kind of cope. They need to be private and kind of deal with things.
I respect that. And Nick Szabo has been involved in the field for a long time, since at least the early 90s. And he worked for David Chaum at DG Cash in the Netherlands in the 90s.
Right. Yep. No, I agree 100%. You know, it's not nothing to worry about, really. If he wants to be private, he's entitled to that, and that's great.
I think these cypherpunks are great examples of what we can be and how far we can go in terms of privacy. And I guess our grandparents were much more cautious about their public image. If they had access to social media, they would see it much more as a trap of revealing their secrets and exposing their weaknesses.
Right. I mean,
when we see something like Facebook, where we get encouraged to share our thoughts and post our pictures from vacations and interact with people and gain trust based on how much other people are willing to share. I don't think the generation of my grandparents would appreciate that. They just wanted to be private, to have a life of their own. They wanted to build some kind of public image, which was not necessarily what they were like, but what they were willing to present to the world.
Right. I mean, there was a lot. I agree with that 100%. You know, even something like when I was a kid, like even getting unemployment, you were never, ever, ever announcing that. You would want to keep that private. So it was a much more modest time back then. So you're right, much more private, more modest, not a lot of that kind of thing. Nowadays, you get kids just posting on GoFundMe for send me to Europe. I want to go to Europe. Pay for it. That would never, ever, ever happen 20 years ago. Like, never. Like, and so it's definitely a different culture. It's definitely changing. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think it's totally natural. Generational changes are nothing to be feared, and it's entirely natural. And the older generation always feels uncomfortable with the younger one. Always. I mean, I read Robert Greene. He just wrote a new book, and in there he cites where on a Sumerian tablet 3,000 years ago, one of the older generations says the new generation is lazy and can't do any work and is just of no worth. I mean, that was 3,000 years ago. Right? So it's always like that, where the older generation thinks the new one is lazy and yada, yada, yada.
I guess we haven't changed much as a species.
Right? Yeah. I mean,
We like to think that we're different this time.
It's interesting. I mean, you get people also that think we're like computers. So, I mean, even Turing, I think in the end thought that he was simply a computer almost. Like there was no divine anything there, he didn't think. So, I mean, it's kind of strange how people kind of formulate their framework of what and who they are.
I used to think I was a computer back in the 4th grade when I was going to math competitions.
Yeah. You're a mentat, huh?
It was hard for me to identify with the other kids, and I was building this kind of story in my mind that this is why I'm different. I'm supposed to be a computer, right? I'm
Right.
like a cyborg. I watched the Terminator 2 back when I was about 8 or something.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of a human form with robotic features, that was so interesting.
Right.
It opened up my imagination to something else, like, hey, maybe I'm different from all the other kids. But as time went by, I just got used to what I am. You accept your limitations much more easily as you get older.
Right.
Even right now, sometimes I'm not happy with myself, but at the end of the day, there's only so much I can do. And having experienced much more by interacting with others, having understood that not even when you have all the talents that maybe I desire, you have a happy and fulfilled life. Well, at least I'm trying.
Right. But I think that happiness is definitely a result of connecting with other people, like having a real connection with your family members and friends. And unfortunately, technology takes away from that, I think, a little bit, and adds to it too. So you can actually find more friends and become friends with more people. But then you also have to keep in mind that the really depth of the matter is your human connection. Um, and that feeling, like that feel that you get of looking at your family member and knowing that they're safe and happy. And then you get that feeling of happiness too, like you're happy with them, for them. And you don't get that with technology, like if you're looking at your family on a Facebook page. You know, it really takes a human connection and interaction to get down to those levels. And it's unfortunate for Nick Szabo if he doesn't really allow that too much, unfortunately. Like I think that's a real beauty in life, that that you can connect with many different people on a human level. And it's much better in person than it is on Twitter or anything of that nature.
I don't know. That's just an assumption. Maybe that he has friends. He's more reserved. We know that he was friends with Hal Finney,
Mm.
and they were both super smart in terms of cryptography and computer science. Sometimes I think that intelligence can be a curse, as you find it harder to relate to other people.
Right. No, I totally 110% agree with that.
When you're just average, you don't really care about stuff.
Right.
And you're just happy to be around people and you enjoy everything. You don't think too much.
Right. No, I know. And then you can turn into the bad guy by doing so very, very quickly. So it's that human thing, though. I think that makes it easier. Like, so if you're talking to somebody directly, you'll start to, even know that they're average and they just like to try to get by in life, that if you're with them and you're talking to them face to face and feeling and understanding their situation, then it becomes a lot easier to get along and understand, really. So that's why the social culture, as far as online, is frightening to me, because it disconnects people from their actual connections and feelings.
You know what I like about Bitcoin in this regard and how it can make the world better?
Huh.
If you have no choice and you don't have any kind of ATM and you have no access to financial services, but you want to exchange Bitcoin, you're going to have to meet somebody.
Right. Yeah.
And
That's
you're
great.
going to do Bitcoin for cash swaps.
Yeah.
And it's during these moments that you realize that the world works even outside of government's regulation, and that this reputation system is actually much more powerful than any government agency that protects your consumer rights, and which allows you to maybe start a lawsuit against any company which infringes your rights.
Right. Well, the law is just as bad as government right now. And this all goes back to, unfortunately, the church. The church 1,000 years ago really started propagating something called natural law. And basically that's their law. They're saying that natural law is, natural, but it's actually their law. It's actually church's law, right? So that was propagated into normal law and like maritime law, things like that. And government comes hand in hand with law. That's what people don't realize. They say they want to get rid of government. Well, they're going to have to deal with law as well, because it comes hand in hand. That oppression comes with law. And I think Nick and Vlad are starting to have a debate online regarding just those issues regarding governance and law and, on these networks. But it definitely comes hand in hand. Law is definitely abused, and it's used as a tool of oppression by people that have money, and it's just as bad as government, quite honestly.
I don't think law in itself as a concept is bad, as we're supposed to have some kind of rules that we agree on and help us live in peace.
Right. If there was the very basic protocol laws, I would agree with you. Like, you can't get overcomplicated, like in law, as you can in really anything else that needs to stand the test of time. It must be simple. It must, be, decentralized or basically open and apply to everybody. And that's how I think law could work. It's very simple, not very many laws, but there is a structure, and there is no force for retaliation for most laws. But right now, as it stands, it's so convoluted and complicated and so overdone with the government itself that they're like two heads on the same hydra. But I agree with you. I'd much rather have a few basic laws rather than complete anarchy. Although I do think probably complete anarchy would work better than what we have right now.
Well, that's debatable, but also a valid point to some extent. If you agree that human nature is good and that we only have small exceptions which make us criminals, and by criminals I mean murderers or thieves.
Right. I do. I think that human nature is good for the most part. Yeah. But I think that human nature, part of that human nature is also a mob mentality, which is not good. So it's a human nature that, when people get together, they kind of morph into a single thing. And that can be bad if it's a negative and it's destructive. But I think that's also human nature too. So I think as an individual, a human in his human nature is good. But I think that there are certain aspects of human nature that are not good, that you see rear its ugly head from time to time.
Supposedly, that's why we have the law, because human nature is flawed and we are greedy animals that seek to accumulate everything for themselves. And that's when you need some kind of objective third party to tell you that you should stop and you're breaking the rules. And it works with Bitcoin because it's a protocol. It's just code,
right,
on which you agree, and you can enforce it by running your own node. But with people, that's a lot more complicated.
Right. I think there's even a crypto project working on that. I think it's called Aragon. so it'd be like more of a basic people governmental thing. So they're working on that kind of government, which is an interesting thing that they're working on. But I do think that like it goes so deep, like, so that's why Bitcoin is so important, because it affects all these things, right? And that's why we've talked about them during the podcast. And if people would just take the time to research Bitcoin, and I'm not saying they'll jump on board, I'm just saying if people just take a breath and understand what we're trying to say in these podcasts, and that it can be very important, and it can be very powerful, and it's exciting to be a part of. Quite honestly, it's exciting to see this rise of this trust network that is now using more power than the state of Israel. And it's only growing. And now you can do satellite transactions, and now you don't even need the internet to actually send Bitcoin to somebody. And now we're having layers built up, base layer and third layer. It's just really, it's really fascinating to see it being built without the central authority. It's really, truly fascinating. It's just really a phenomenon that I don't think people really understand how important it is yet. Even me, like even us don't really understand how big and important this really actually is, or can be.
Sometimes I wonder how the history books will talk about our times.
Right? Yeah.
But that depends on the historians and the establishment which pays them to write about our times. As we can either be some kind of folk heroes like the cowboys of the Wild West, trying to do justice according to their own rules, or we can be those who brought humanity to some kind of awakening state.
But hopefully now that we have a blockchain, that's not going to matter. Now we can have some objective proofs to go back and look at. So I think, in time, like, you're not going to, you want to store everything on the Bitcoin chain, which is why I think different protocols will survive. So, take a protocol like Hush, which is something familiar with Zcash, but an offshoot that you'll be able to upload a file that you can refer to. So say you're a journalist, then you can put your stories right on the blockchain that could be seen 100 years later and can't be tampered with. That's very powerful as far as truth and keeping history the way it should be and truthful. So from this point in time, we might see like history. It's not going to be so easy for those powerful people to just rewrite history anymore, because there will be actual verifiable proof of situations and stories that you can go back and actually see.
Hopefully they're going to have this podcast too and realize that we're not really villains, are we?
Right. No villains. Uh-oh. No more of that.
I'll let you take the call, but before we end this interview, I feel like I should let you talk more about yourself and your work and tell people how they can follow you on Twitter.
I'm at Sianok Records. And
okay, can you spell it?
SIAYNOQ Records, which is RECORDS, on Twitter. And I just now started actually interacting on Twitter the start of this year. I had an account for some time, but I never really interacted on it because I was a more introverted fellow. Sianok Record was a dream of mine. I released two releases actually. I found an artist called Universal Mind, who his real name is Vinny Twireweiler, who was in Michigan, just an incredible artist. And I released his album, Scribble, and I also co-released with Hummus Records in Switzerland, The Fawn. And that was just basically a dream fulfilled. And I'll eventually start back up again, but a few years ago, I went through a divorce and all that kind of stuff got put on hold. So I'm writing a book. I've been in several bands, toured the world there, do artwork. So I'm basically just an artist, and I really enjoy life and speaking about philosophy and things and meeting other people.
Sounds great. Do you also produce music?
I would like to. I mean, I think I quite honestly, I think I really have a good grasp on feeling and human feelings, and I really think that's what a good music producer does, is actually brings out the feeling that a band is trying to convey, or the emotions that they're trying to touch, or something of that nature. As far as a music producer that is just, bankrolls people, that's not what I do. I would like to be music production to where I would actually influence and bring out better art in the bands or artists. But I think, it's something that I'm looking to do definitely in the future.
Okay, now I know where I can send my demos and my mixtapes next time.
Nice. I'll definitely listen.
I'm not sure if you're going to like my punk rock, but whatever.
At least I'll be honest. I'm not a guy that'll beat around the bush. I mean, I'm a Virgo in triplicity, so I'm highly critical. Right? And so I would definitely let you know, truthfully, what I personally thought of it, if that's good or bad or in between.
Okay, Shaitan, or Shaitan, how do you pronounce it? Shaitan or Shaitan?
Shaitan is fine, yeah. Shaitan.
Sounds like Satan with extra steps.
It is kind of a little bit of a reference to the process of, how should I call it? Shaitan is basically, the good and the evil, and the process that it might take to get back from one side to the other. So it also means, kind of a desert demon. But I really thought that, it comes from Dune, obviously, and it's I believe it's in Heretics or God Emperor, where they said, the God Emperor says that they will, in the future, they're going to call me not the God Emperor, but they will call me Shaitan. And that just means that over time, things change, but yet stay the same.
Hopefully, with Bitcoin is going to be the same. We're going to change the narrative, but the protocol is going to be the same.
Exactly.
So thank you very much for this. I'll try to post it within a couple of days.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Vlad. It was a pleasure, and I had a great time chatting with you, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Likewise.
Excellent.
So talk to you later.
Later, Vlad.
Bye.
Good night, by the way.
Thanks. It's close to midnight here.